council policy session to order on Tuesday, August 1st, 2017 at 7:30 p.m. Roll call tonight. We have Councilman Porter, Councilman McComber, myself, and Councilwoman Barch. We do have a quorum. I've asked Councilman Porter to lead us in our invocation and Councilman Wilden to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to gather together as citizens of Saratoga Springs this evening and to discuss the issues facing our city. And we're grateful for this great country and the opportunity we have to govern ourselves, and we ask Thee to please bless us as we deliberate, that we'll be able to make decisions that will benefit the citizens of Saratoga Springs. And we ask Thee to also bless those men and women in the armed forces serving overseas, that they will be looked after as they protect our freedoms here at home. And we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please rise and repeat the pledge with me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, this is portion's been set aside for public input. This time has been set aside for the public to express ideas, concerns, and comments. Please be respectful in your comments. Please try and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record. And if you're here for one of the public hearings to Title 19 engineering standards or city code amendments, please save your comments for the public hearing portion of the meeting. Is anybody here for public input tonight? Thank you. Perfect. That'd be great. Thank you, Sue. Chris is, no? Was Bud, yes. So we'll get with Chief because he's over crossing guards right now.
Just on a side note, I was the lieutenant in my school safety patrol as a 5th grader, so it's a pretty big deal.
Okay. Mark, can you follow up with the police on that?
We actually shared this with them at the transportation meeting in the spring, and there was hesitation on their part. So I'm glad Sue's pursuing this, and we'll push it forward.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just seeing, I've read that daily. No, it's okay.
Mayor,
you,
thought
Ren.
on that, if we can maybe get David on it also as far as some kind of a little PR piece on Facebook of, hey, this is when you merge and how you merge, and we actually do want to fill in the gaps and not merge until the very end, so we have more traffic on that side or something, I don't know. Some cute little thing.
Once they have something finalized, then I'll put that out.
I saw that the other day. Someone was mad at us.
Is anybody else here for public input? Seeing none, I will close the public input at this time. Reports from the council. We had the night out against crime with the police tonight, which is the reason we started our meeting late tonight. Thank you to our police department and fire department for putting that on in conjunction with Walmart and other businesses throughout the community and Lifelight that help support that every year. Each year it gets bigger. I think we have more and more people here every year. It's the one time a year we have Home Depot in the city with supplies. So it's a good thing, so we appreciate that. No other reports at this time. MAG, COG, and all those meetings are coming up. If from the council, we'll start with Councilman Porter.
I don't have any reports right now.
Councilman Wilden?
No more than
Okay. No less either?
slightly less.
Slightly less. Councilman McComber? Councilwoman Barch?
None, all the meetings are coming up, I've had summer break, so.
July is a slow month. Okay.
That was a slow month for us.
Yeah. Okay.
Meetings, guys.
Mark, anything from administration?
No, Mayor and Council, not at this time. Yes, I do. We need to, thank you. We need to cancel the Planning Commission appointments. There's a little miscommunication on our part, and we got that on the agenda too soon, so. Business item number 2.
Oh, we all know who it's going to be. Sure.
Okay. If there's no other updates, we'll take care of canceling business item number 2 up front. Do I have a motion?
Mayor, I move that we table Planning Commission appointment business item 2.
I have a first from Councilman Porter. Do I have a second?
Second that?
I have a second from Councilman McComber. Any further discussion? Councilwoman Barch?
Aye.
McComber?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We'll start with the public hearings, code amendments, Title 19, Ordinance 17-17.
It's the correct one then, Kevin? This one?
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to try to take care of this with my own screen, because we had some difficulties with the Planning Commission meeting going through these. But as mentioned in the staff report, a lot of these changes are really just kind of legal concerns, basically clarifying the intent of Title 19, strengthening the language, removing some odd language. Like for instance, there are multiple references to this ordinance. Title 19 used to be called the ordinance, so now it's called Title 19. So a lot of code cleanup. There were a number of policy decisions that I felt were consistent with the direction that the council's given us, as well as consistent with other changes we made in other sections of Title 19. I could go through those. I've got a list of what I consider to be kind of policy decisions for the council's consideration. The Planning Commission did look at a couple of these things and wanted to table them for further discussion. 190302 was the discussion about administrative rejection of applications. Planning staff continues to have issues with applications coming in that don't meet the code. Developers make almost no effort sometimes in making sure it meets the code. And so that creates problems when you have situations where years later, after, through all these, dozens of reviews sometimes, and the worst examples, the code changes and developers claim that the application is vested under the prior ordinance, and that does create problems because we do change things. We change the standards when things come up. Like for instance, the cross-section is being changed because there were some inconsistencies with the fire code. So basically, after this administrative rejection of applications, I'm just priming the council for further discussion on that. The Planning Commission tabled that, did want to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. But this was a section that was drafted per a discussion I had with the Property Rights Ombudsman. He recommended that we have this so we can address those situations where the code changes and give staff some authority to reject applications.
And we got a question.
So did the Planning Commission give a reason why they wanted to table? They weren't prepared to speak to it? Did they not have enough time to review it?
Yeah, so this was something that I just brought for the first time to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission hearing, and we presented it up on the screen. They had not had a chance to look at that prior. So this is the first time. This is just something that is kind of a late addition. And frankly, planning staff hasn't had much of a chance to look at it either.
Thank you.
The other one that was tabled was 191311, which is the language that requires bearing of utility lines and power poles, so forth, overhead utilities. And right now we have a code section that's really ambiguous. That isn't a very good section that we've been using to require bearing power poles. So this section is a lot more specific and gives some clear criteria. And it's also, since it's been in front of the Planning Commission, it's subject to the pending ordinance doctrine. Planning Commission will continue to flesh that out at the next meeting. We'll hopefully have a version of that as well as the administrative rejection language at the council meeting after the next Planning Commission meeting. So other than those two, there's several other areas I wanted to just draw your attention to. 190308, appointment of hearing examiner. We have a section in Title III that allows the city manager to appoint the hearing examiner. That's just changing Title 19 to be consistent with that.
Can I ask a question on that, Mayor?
Yep.
On that, one of the things that was changed in there is that the hearing examiner was chosen by the mayor with consent and advice of council, much like Planning Commission is, and that changed to city manager which I think is probably okay, but why are we completely taken out of it? I would think that we would still want to have some consent on that and advice on that.
So here, one of the concerns is when you make a decision, so you are the land use authority in a few occasions within the code, and when you appoint a hearing examiner to look at decisions that you've made, there needs to be a little bit of removal of that so there's not a conflict of interest.
Is a hearing examiner chosen for a specific case, or is it, are they chosen for 2 years or whatever a time period is?
Kind of a long-term appointment.
I would think, I mean,
Basically,
if we're following the example of the U.S. Constitution, Congress appoints the judges on the Supreme Court, so I don't necessarily know that we would, you know, if we're appointing them for
one
a period of
specific
time.
case, yes.
Yeah.
We'd like you to hear this case. And obviously,
yeah.
that's not correct, but I would think
If they're
that,
appointed for a 4-year term or something like that, then I think.
so we talked about this previously in Title III and had changed that so the city manager does that. And of course, the council can change that. We've set up criteria for, you know, hearing examiner must be this, must live outside of the city, there's a bunch of criteria there. Your choice is, of course, you could keep that, retain that power, and then there's an inconsistency in the code with Title III or Title II, I believe. Or you could, refine that criteria if you wanted, or when the city manager may make those appointments. So you're giving the city manager enough direction to make you feel comfortable with that appointment.
rope to hang himself.
Well, I mean, for example, you know, this is something that I think is, I just received some training on this recently at the Local Governments Trust. One of the things that is really a challenge is there are some decisions that are just with the hearing officer, and there are some just administrative decisions that are just tough administrative decisions that just need to be done judiciously, and it just needs to follow the code. And oftentimes I think we've put ourselves in a position where it still comes back to you all and puts you all in a very tough situation where you're going to have to basically be in a position of doing the most unpopular thing imaginable because it's required by administrative law. And so, you know, again, it's the broader philosophical question of, do we want to create some separation so that those administrative decisions are just taken care of and they're just handled at an administrative level, or do you want to keep them so that, you know, it keeps coming back to you? You know, some examples of things, there's just some unpopular things that because of federal law or whatever, we're mandated to do. And where we've reserved those rights in some cases for you as the council to have to make that decision, that could potentially put you at extreme odds with every, you know, everybody's public opinion. And where it's an administrative decision, you have to implement the code.
Right, well, and I understand that, but I think what we're talking about is not necessarily wanting, I mean, I'm fine with having a hearing examiner and allowing them to make those administrative decisions. I think our concern is whether or not the council should be accountable for who that person is rather than staff. That's my understanding of, you know, where's the accountability for choosing that person?
Sure, and to some extent, it's almost as if it's a staff member that is, their whole focus is to make like an ombudsman type decision. And so that's kind of the direction that we've been leaning, which is it's an administrative function. Their sole purpose is to follow the administrative rules that are in place, and so that's why we made that decision. Now, if you want to retain that for yourself, you can, but our suggestion is that it become truly an administrative function that separates that, you know, appointment.
Certainly pros and cons of each.
Sure.
I guess the argument in favor of this change is provide that additional level of insulation. And if you're really not happy with the hearing examiner, you can tell Mark to appoint someone else, right? Because you can direct Mark, you supervise Mark, and if you're not happy with it, it's just really it's
Transparent if we're doing that behind the scenes rather than appointing them in open meeting.
was more of an issue too, of just like I mentioned, when you're acting as the decision maker and it's appealed to the hearing examiner. I mean, if you want, we do recommend those administrative decisions be handled at an administrative level instead of legislative level. But anyway, well, I'll take whatever direction from the council on that.
I mean, I'm okay with it as well. If we wanted it in between, I mean, the mayor's authority, which has been delegated, is administrative, and I would be fine if it was appointed by the city manager with consent. Mayor doesn't have vote on certain things, and so it does create that segregation. I'm not pushing for that. I'm just saying that would be another option.
I mean, you could also say after consultation with the mayor or the city council. That's another option. Should I move on, or do we want to? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So 1905-08 is an addition that is consistent with the building code. This is about the base flood zone map. Has to be 1 foot. Before we said it just has to be above. We just want to make sure we're consistent with the building code, of course. 1910 is the Hillside Development Ordinance, or section, or title, chapter, I should say, in the chapter. And there was some discussion in there about blasting and permits needed to be issued by the city council. And we had an inconsistency. The engineering standards had its own process. So we're recommending deleting that out and adding a section in Title 18, which is where it belongs, in building and engineering, that discusses the conditions of a blasting permit.
Else do that?
That's what I thought. So 1912-05, there's a discussion about, so before we were requiring performance bonds in an amount of 115% of the engineer's estimate. There's been some, kind of a best practice that's been passed along by some land use attorneys, that the statute isn't meant to build in that contingency, that it should be 100%. So now what we do, instead of building on top of as an extra cushion, we're making sure that each line item builds in that flexibility.
So how do we then cover our costs? Because if we're having to administer and to call this bond, that costs us money. So how do we take into consideration what it actually costs the city? Not just the fact that we have to then obtain this funds to fulfill whatever obligation the developer didn't, but also then to cover the fact that we've had to cover those expenses. We've got, legal expenses, we've got noticing expenses, whatever it might be. How do we cover those costs?
So we've built those into the fees.
So inside of the bond that we are then requiring, those fees are already included in there?
Yeah, because every development is required to post a bond, and those are part of the review and inspection fees.
Good.
It's just a best practice because the statute says one thing, and 115% it could be interpreted as being inconsistent with the state law.
Also in that same section, Kevin, why, or how, I guess I should say, how do we determine which type of assurance is used? So there's there's nothing set out within this title that talks about when we use which assurance. So how is that set out?
So we've left it to the developer's discretion. They're all fairly liquid forms of performance assurances or bonds. The letter of credit, escrow, or cash bond. It's really at the developer's discretion, whichever form works for them. And I do have a standard letter of credit that the bank has to issue. And we also do some verifying. There's some requirements for the banks. They have to have a certain financial rating. They have to have an office in Utah. There's things that we check within that section. It's worked pretty well. Since we've gotten rid of the ability to have surety bonds, it's worked well. 1912-07 requires developers to pay rollback taxes prior to recording. Most cities require that. We just don't have a specific code requirement. 1912-08 lot line adjustments. The intent of Kemper's recent changes was to require a plat amendment, and I've just added language that does in fact make that a requirement. 191304, planning director decisions appealed to the planning commission. It seemed a little strange that we had that there. So if someone's not happy with a planning commission decision, or sorry, planning director decision when he's acting as the land use authority, they can appeal it to the planning commission. It just doesn't make any sense. So now it's appealed to the hearing examiner like it should be. 191308, this may need some discussion by the council. We've talked about this before. It requires developments to pipe canals. There probably aren't a whole lot of major liability concerns for the city if that's left open in an open condition. There are several provisions in the Governmental Immunity Act, as well as other sections of the Utah Code that exempt us from liability. However, those could get changed in the future by the legislature. You never know. Piping canals is beneficial because it does prevent the lawsuit from ever happening, and it also helps preserve the water and prevents evaporation losses. And we're pretty large shareholders in the canal, so it would kind of make sense to make that a requirement. It's in the general welfare of the city, but it is an expense that developers would have to bear. So it's up to the council to decide, but that is making that a requirement of development, is to pipe those.
Councilman McComber has a question.
Sure.
I'll just respond real quickly. I think that there's no problem as long as we have it standard that all developers who are developing where there's a canal, they have to enclose the canal. Then I have no problem with that. I think besides the evaporation, which water is a rare resource in Utah, it's a safety issue. We do have a tendency for kids to want to play in those types of facilities, and we even had just recent incidences where they even climbed fences. So even fencing a canal doesn't seem to work, and a lot of people don't realize, the scouts here too, this is important to share with your friends, the top water doesn't look like it's moving, but it is flying underneath. It is moving extremely fast, and it can be it's an undertow, and it can be very dangerous at times, those canals. My question is
Absolutely.
Thank you. My question is on 1913-03-1C. You didn't cross out the will, and so do you want us to decide whether it's shall or will? Because I think an incomplete application will be rejected and not processed for review. It shouldn't even be questionable.
Yeah, so you're probably let me pull that up really quick. Don't worry about it, Dave.
So you want us to decide on those?
1913-03.
Yeah, 1913-03. Yeah, there's a few I saw on this one in particular.
Yes. So these are actually recommendations by Commissioner Still. She saw language and she thought shall was stronger language than will. So
generally
the intent is to replace the will with the shall. So when you see those highlighted, there's probably 6 or 7 of those, and I was going to mention those.
The will would be crossed out if we choose to go with the shall.
Yeah, they're both. Both of those words are mandatory words, but shall I recognize that that's stronger language, and so her recommendation was to replace that.
All the ones that I saw, I missed. I only saw 3. He said they were weren't crossed out. I saw the ones that were crossed out. 3 that say I caught the same 3. Okay, well that's pretty good. Whenever I catch the same things that Shelley Barch catches, I'm always happy.
Yeah, I didn't cross it out because I was hoping to get the direction.
So
from
me
the council
personally, on the 3 that I saw, when we got to this one, I thought I would bring it up because it was when you're in this section. I would rather go with the shall.
I agree.
Again, just the ambiguity. Any ambiguity is gone. So.
Absolutely.
And this really ties back to your section that we haven't even done, where an incomplete application will be rejected, and here's the reasons why. You didn't really get any thoughts there. I read those. I actually really like them. I'm looking forward to the Planning Commission vetting those 2 sections that they tabled, and so technically we'll probably be tabling them because we want to get their feedback. But my quick review, they make absolute perfect sense, and it makes sense why the ombudsman reached out and talked to you about potentially having that in our code, because it just adds that extra layer of protection. So. Yeah.
So what the conflict is the state statute says that an applicant is entitled to substantive land use review, and the problem was that was getting abused. So I called the ombudsman and said, how can we prevent this from being abused? Because this keeps happening.
Well, we realize
we have an obligation to give that substantive land use review, but how do we empower our planning staff to be able to reject it where it's just clear that they're so far away from meeting the code? But
thank you.
May I add something to that? And I like that section when it comes through, because I feel like sometimes you guys really do feel pressured to bring things forth that we're not going to approve, but then it shows up on the council agenda, and then people come out, I can't believe you would approve this when we never had any intent, and it's an incomplete application. Or not incomplete, sorry, it's a different thing. It's not meeting code, and it's a terrible development. Anyway, I'm supportive of that when it comes back through.
We had that one application that 46 could complies.
Yeah.
Kimber's not here, but that was like, she cringed when she presented that to us. So I think that's really what you're trying to protect is
Absolutely.
that kind of, so thank you.
And it doesn't put you in an awkward position of having to say no on something when you really don't want to. You know, if they just come in and met the code, then you'd be able to say yes, and everyone would be happy.
Thank
And
you.
it also, we had one that took 3 or 4 years to approve because they just, they wanted planning to basically design it
job.
and tell them where, what to do as far as meeting the code, and that's not our job.
Thank you.
So, okay, moving on. Annexations, one of the issues we've had is there's 2 separate tracks right now in the code. One in Utah Code, Title 10, Chapter 4, where the City Council at annexation determines the zone of a property. Our annexation chapter required it to go through the separate track where a public hearing and recommendation from the Planning Commission was required. The intent of the annexation law, in my opinion, is that the council makes that assignment, and then if a rezone is needed later, then you can, after the property is annexed into the city, then you can send it to Planning Commission and make a recommendation on that. But there are members of planning staff that felt like going to the Planning Commission made a lot of sense there. I don't think that's the intent of the annexation statute. And in fact, in some cases, it actually creates more problems because then you're sending out notice to there's a 300-foot rule, and you have a big, you saw it here where we had a lot of people here from Lehigh that were expressing their opinion about the rezone, and it kind of threw a wrench in the whole annexation process. So whatever the council wants to decide on that, my recommendation is to take that out of the annexation statute, which, not statute, but out of the annexation chapter, which means when the property is annexed through a rezone, you'll make that zoning assignment at that time. Okay, I see a lot of nodding, so I'll move on. Constitutional taking chapter, there was some strange language in there that said that chapter and that appeal process only applies to physical takings. That's where the city actually goes and occupies property, like builds a road right through someone's property without permission. Most of the takings issues are regulatory takings, where you deny or substantially reduce the value of someone's property. So I've added that, so it's actually regulatory takings. And it's nice to have that additional appeal process before they go and sue us in court.
While we're on that one, I'm looking at, sorry, gotta go up to find the heading. 1924-04, 8. You just changed the hearing examiner to the city council, but then when I read that, I don't know what, I was tired, I just traveled a lot of hours, and so I was a little tired. I read through this like 5 times and I still wasn't sure whether or not it says what I think it says.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I did change that, so it's the hearing examiner.
Right, but then it says, it's kind of like a double negative, because it says, if he fails to hear and decide within 30 days, the decision appealed from shall be presumed to be denied. So what, can you explain to me what's that gonna?
It's like,
Okay, that's kind of how I read it, but reading it, I mean, it's like, the decision appealed from, I know. So can you translate the lawyer talk?
Makes sense to me.
What's gonna happen? If he doesn't hear it in 30 days, it's assumed that he is denying it. Yes. Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
It's effectively denial.
Okay, that's what I thought it said, but like I said, I read through it 5 times and I was like, I'm not sure that that's actually what it says, so.
Would you point that out really quick? Maybe there is a slight adjustment.
1924. It's awkward, the wording's just awkward, and so. But it's a
Yeah.
You were traveling.
And slept last week.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Sure, yeah. That's a good point. So what makes sense to me when I read it doesn't make sense to the average person usually, so. It's lawyer speak, I'm telling you.
Oh, that's better than below average, because that's,
Did want to point out, so 1925 Lake Shore Trail, I was making changes to a prior version of that chapter. But I noticed, and Kimber recently changed that. The language that I changed is still in there. So it just kind of strengthens the requirement. Except, I will say this, we probably don't want to put the buildings or structures language in there that I'm recommending.
That was my concern, is that if we put no buildings or structures in between the Lakeshore Trail and the lake, that's very problematic for docks, boat houses, lakeshore restaurant dining, things like that, that we want to encourage. Bat houses in our mixed mixed water.
And then
area.
I did realize that was the intent of the council in that mixed lakeshore zone, and so that's my recommendation, is not to include that, but do include some of that
So that in 1925 1D, we would
strengthen language.
just remove, are we removing all of D then, or just,
or structures.
or just,
Just where it prohibits structures and buildings.
so just remove structures, strike out structures?
And buildings.
Is there a large dwelling-like thing that wouldn't be considered a dwelling that could be a structure?
Dwelling is specifically a place where you live.
Well, right, but so I'm thinking of like, say, a cell phone tower. That's not a dwelling, that's a structure.
Right.
Well, I know, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, I think, I don't know the answer, I'm just saying.
Where's the exception?
No, I'm just saying, if we don't have something other than or structures, technically, cell phone tower, well, that's not a great example, but because there's other codes around that, or something similar could be built there. I don't want an exception to be allowed to put a cell phone tower next to in between the trail and the lake,
Got
is
it.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you're welcome to direct me to do whatever you want on that one.
I'm looking
I would
for-
say,
I don't know how to solve it.
Except those that are commonly found in the waterfront, except those that are,
Over a certain size,
you could delegate that planning staff to revisit that code language that allows the structures and buildings in that area. That's what I would recommend.
To make sure to not allow is the point.
Yes, sorry, to make sure that those are not allowed.
I'm not advocating for a cell phone tower by the edge of our lake, so.
That may need to be fleshed out more as far as planning expertise on that. My intent, like I said, was to clarify the intent of Title 19.
I'm fine
strengthen
with
it.
striking it as long as we just go back and look at it.
Okay.
yep, direct stuff.
She's got good notes.
Yeah, I'm just making that note, so, and then David, if you can revisit that. All right, 1927 is creating a better process for changing street numbering and street names. And basically, if it's a street name that's being changed, that has to go to the council, and we have a process there now, so there's not any ambiguity.
And it works.
We don't want planning staff we don't want city staff making those decisions. They're too controversial.
Can I just make a note to staff on this one? When we make a name change on a road, especially a name change, that we contact, David could probably figure this one out really easily, planning staff can get to this also, but Google Maps, whatever other map companies are out there, so that gets changed. So for example, Fall Harvest Drive up in Harvest Hills still comes up wrong on most of the mapping. And that's something that you have to kind of hound them about. And maybe, Brian in GIS does that. I don't know who's going to do that, but somebody makes sure that we,
Councilwoman Barch, we actually show as Lehigh where we're sitting sometimes, still.
and at my house we do too. So, in fact, Westlake sometimes shows up literally in Lehigh, which is really funny. So just things like that, if we can make sure we hound them about getting those changes done so that people can actually find where they're trying to go, that would be great.
Could take a really just strong-worded letter from the fire chief or police chief about public safety to get that job done,
Yeah.
but
So you're
Figure
saying
that
you
out.
live in Lehigh, yet you're on,
Sometimes, yeah, that's what it shows up.
So one thing I didn't notice that I caught today was in that, as I was reviewing these changes is, so the name of the street, I made it a city council decision. The numbering, which seems, you don't want to see those. Numbering decisions are city staff, but I put the wrong standard of review in there, not realizing it. So I put the legislative standard of review. It should actually be substantial evidence standard. So I'd recommend in the council motion,
It's on B, 5B.
I believe so. Let me get there. Yeah.
To, how do you want to word that?
Well, the city, so your language for the, appeal of the
We're on the numbering one.
council is correct.
Yeah, the 5B.
The numbering
But
under
5B is
5, it should be a change of street numbering is an administrative decision. It shall be affirmed by a court of competent jurisdiction if there is substantial evidence on the record supporting the decision.
Oh, up in 5.
Oh.
but then you also have.
So I'm just going to say per Kevin's comments.
Yeah, just in the motion, say change it from the legislative standard of review to the administrative standard. Because obviously staff doesn't make legislative decisions, so.
Nope.
All right, so there's one last one, and hopefully this won't be
52 pages, yes?
too big of an issue, but the reasonable accommodation language, those are recommendations that were given to us by Jody Burnett, who's handled a lot of these appeals. It's changing the allowed number of residents from 4 to 8. There's been some U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have basically said you got to allow at least 8. We would allow 8 people in a family living in a residence. You can't create, basically what it comes down to is you can't treat these any differently than you would treat a single family residence. There can't be any additional requirements imposed on them.
So Kevin, on that, we do have the ability, however, with home-based businesses to give parking standards. So if they have a certain number of employees, for example, daycares, preschools, things like that, we can actually require them to have off-street parking. Do we have the ability to do that with these residential facilities as well?
We do.
Because that's honestly the biggest concern. You may have 8 people living in the home, but if you've got 4 or 5 employees, in addition to whoever's living there, who may or may not drive, that's a lot of vehicles to be parked on the
Absolutely.
streets.
Yeah, there's some language in there about parking, making sure that those needs are addressed.
So we do have the ability to do that, and we have that already inside of our standards?
Yes, I know that for sure on the reasonable accommodation language.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Well, it's not going to be much. Just saying. I might have 2 teenage girls that,
Yeah, so,
use a lot of water.
yeah, so this is what it says right now. This is where it's a permitted use. It says, the minimum number of parking spaces required shall be the same as the number required for a dwelling with similar occupancy and density in the same zone.
But that's the occupancy, that's not the occupation that's within there. And this is absolutely a home-based business. So how do we?
Yeah, you can't, the problem is you can't treat them like a business. You have to treat them like a single-family residence.
Even though they've got a number of employees coming in?
Yeah, just imagine a very large family with 5 teenagers. Well, you may not have that many, but
But wait, but they have
4
employees.
teenagers,
But these are
and they
employees,
each have
just
a
like we
car.
have daycares and preschools and everything else. So we can't require off-street parking for the
For the
employees?
employees?
Yeah, like I said, the standards have to be basically the same as if it were a single-family residence. And it's presumed that you would have employees. Now when it comes to a reasonable accommodation where they're asking for more than 8, you can look at that and see, is this a use that's creating an additional impact above and beyond what a single-family residence creates? And that's where you could look at that and say, you must have additional off-street parking in order to get this reasonable accommodation.
So that would be
increase the
reasonable then,
number of
because any
residents.
other business in your home, if you have a lot of employees coming in, you have to have off-street parking for them. So that would be reasonable then.
It's reasonable.
Yes, but remember the residential treatment facility for a person with a disability is a permitted use.
Right.
Right, but the employee, we're not talking about the resident, we're talking about the
employees.
employee who comes in.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah. So there's 8 residents staying there for rehabilitation, and then 3 or 4 or 5 employees at different times coming in. We can't expect to have them provide parking for those 4 or 5 employees, not the residents, but the employees?
Yeah, so like I said, that's where the Fair Housing Act comes in, and the
But it's
Americans
not a
with Disability
housing-
Act
it's not a
comes
Housing
in.
issue.
It's
That's
a
an
business,
employee,
it's
it's
a
a business
home-based
issue.
business.
It's both
So
the
if I
Fair
could-
Housing Act and the ADA issue as well.
Mark?
Yeah, if I could, and what Kevin's alluding to, we actually spent about 45 minutes in a training with Jody Burnett about a week ago on this particular issue. It is very complex. If we did anything with this type of a unit to make them take a step that a normal resident wouldn't be required to do,
A
then...
normal resident with a business in their home would be required to take that step.
But this isn't considered a business, this is considered a residential use. It's very nuanced. I know, it's one
They're
of those
making
things...
income.
This is where we
I
have...
can come off of my taxes.
This is one of those really tough decisions where we would say, we have to follow a very specific pattern in dealing with this type of an application, because if we violate it by requiring an extra public hearing, if we require an extra process, then we've potentially violated someone's civil rights under the Fair Housing Act and ADA, and it's really, really complex, and I apologize because, we could probably spend the rest of the night debating this particular nuance, but if we were to come in and say, hey, your staff has to have a parking requirement, you have to meet this requirement, that in and of itself could be fatal to our position in approving one of these types of uses. And so I suggest that if this is something you're very passionate about, let us bring in Jody Burnett, who defends these kind of cases. I know South Ogden just went through a really nasty issue with something like this. I know some other communities that have gone through this. We'd be more than happy to bring him in, do a specialized training on this type of a use, but we've got to be very careful. This is one of those ones where I would say, we would want to make sure that the experts were consulting with us, because one misstep can be just a fatal, very large lawsuit that we're just writing large checks.
So the original language was based off the 4 residents language, or 4 residents language was based off of model ordinance that was drafted by attorneys with experience in these issues with the Fair Housing Act and the ADA. And that language has since been challenged, that the minimum of 4 residents, it's not enough. And the recommendation now is to go to 8.
And I don't have a
I
problem with
realize
that.
that's a hard
realize
decision,
that.
but unfortunately, though, it's not considered a business, it's considered a single-family residence, even with employees. And that's why you can't really require off-street parking when it's the 8 residents. When they go above that, say they request a reasonable accommodation for 9, 10, 11, 12, that's when you can say, yes, you have to provide some off-street parking, because you're creating an additional impact on the residential character and nature of this neighborhood.
So one last item on that. I want to be very clear. We can, so like the treatment is for only those people that live in the home. They couldn't hang a shingle and have people coming into the neighborhood to be treated at that facility. That would be outside of this particular issue. So we're talking about only those people that live inside those walls that then qualify for those treatment. They can't open the doors and say, okay, I'm now running a business out of here beyond the residents of that home. So that is something that we can protect against, which it's a nuanced thing again, but I just wanted you to be aware that it's not as if they're
How do we know
bringing
how
people.
many people have actually got living in there? How do we monitor that?
We would be able to have, the,
Inspections?
Yes. So it would be treated just like any other code enforcement item. The code enforcement officer has the ability to make inspections, and they're issued a business license. They're also issued a state permit through the Department of Health. So they have
They
requirements.
have a business license, but they're not actually a business.
Yeah, and that's another issue too. The recommendation is not even to require a business license, but
Or federal government.
so I mean, if I haven't included that today, but that may be something that we discuss later.
Okay.
Perfect.
But the nice thing about the business license is it ties in with the Department of Health license.
Not going to solve the federal government's problems here tonight.
We're not going to solve every issue. Jody Burnett did make one additional recommendation, and this, I think, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know how the council is going to feel about it, but they did say that the decision for a reasonable accommodation should be sent to a hearing examiner rather than a city council. That's going to hear from all the residents that are upset about asking for this reasonable accommodation. That's the recommendation.
That actually makes sense.
If you,
Yeah.
yeah, if you'd like, if you can make the motion to change that, that's in 1905-09, and I'll write that down.
1905-09?
1905-09 in subsections 5A and 5C. So change the reasonable accommodation decision to hearing examiner.
So just from legislative to administrative again?
Yeah, so it's,
Basically. From legislative standards to administrative standards, because that's what it is. By taking it to the hearing examiner instead of...
it's still an administrative decision even in front of the council because of what the standards that you've created. But it would be going to the hearing examiner because of just the political considerations. So other than that, you have any other questions? I'd be happy to answer those. Okay. That was a lot, and thank you for your patience.
Okay, we need to do the public hearing portion. Is anybody here to add comments to that discussion? Title 19?
I'm Scott Carlson at 2264 North, 1450 East in Lehigh. I have a few questions and concerns about probably just a handful of the things that are in the changes. It is a little bit cumbersome to read through, probably not just in its the language and the discussion that you've had, but the packet includes between the Title 19 things and the engineering standards and design details is about 200 and something pages. So it's
374 pages total for a packet.
For the packet, yeah. But just those two sections, it's pretty voluminous. My concern in there sort of relates to a few of the items that were discussed. First one is the section in 1903-02, which it appeared that we're encouraged to save that for another day. I wasn't sure if you were thinking of saving it for another day, but I'm going to suggest that that's a good idea. I think the way it's written, it's not ready. And let me just say that the development project takes time, and there's commitments that are made all the way through that process. Generally, those are made based on the current code, right? And so a developer agrees to purchase the farmer's land based on certain understandings of what's coming and what he has to do. At a certain point, he needs to know that he can rely on the current code of the day, not that it'll just get changed at any particular day. As I read the bullet number 4 and 5 under this proposed 1903-02, I'm providing my comments today, even though you might deal with it another day, because I'd like to not have to come back. 4 is determination of compliance with the title or other regulations. So that's the review that's going to happen by staff to decide, is the project as submitted, does it comply with all of the requirements of the code? And staff will take 20 days. Then if there's any concerns, they'll give it back to the developer. He'll have 10 days to fix everything and submit it back, and if not, it's administratively rejected. What does it mean to be administratively rejected? That's number 5. It says if it's deemed rejected, it's as if you didn't submit it. So there's still no vesting on the current code. If there's any little details, so it's almost, the way this is written currently, it's almost as if you must be 100% finished and fully approved before you can rely on the code for your design. So really we're talking about at the end, not at the beginning. And at some point we need to be able to say, this is the code, I can make the commitments, I can pay the money. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have changes in the code that could happen at any time. And that kind of brings me to that last point. The ordinance associated with this change contemplates that, presuming that it gets voted on and approved today, that all of these code changes will take effect today, pending published notification and all the things. That's how it says it. It doesn't set an effective date out at a certain point in the future. It takes effect upon vote by the majority council. It's done now. So if we got projects that are in a certain portion of the way through the project, through the design, partway through review, whatever, there's a change in the code, and now it retroactively affects what's been going on for months between landowners, developers, and the staff. So I'm concerned about that. My recommendation would be to set a reasonable date out into the future for those ordinances and changes to take effect, so that there's time for people to finish up what they have on what they've already done. So that's my request on any of these items. Thank you.
For public hearing portion? Seeing none, I will close the public, sorry.
Larry Jacobson, 9533 South, 7th East, Sandy. My comments pretty well go in line with what Scott was saying. I spoke to a couple people on the Utah Home Builders Association, the Utah County, and let them know that this meeting was happening tonight and that it was going to affect the projects that they're working on, and none of them were aware of it. So there's a couple, they said, well, we got some notification that they were amending code such and such, but they didn't really go in and look at them because they said it doesn't make any sense to us. So when I spoke with them, they said, well, this is really going to affect what we're trying to do if these changes are made tonight. And if you notice, there's no builders here. There's nobody that's doing projects here. The only way I knew about it was Scott had called me and told me. So I kind of want to echo what Scott says. If you're going to make these changes, they can't be like right this second. You need to have some time frame that maybe people who have projects that are in the works, that have already met with staff, give them, some time to comply with that, because it really does put developers in a bad situation when these changes are just thrown upon them on the last minute. And that's my comments.
You.
Chad Palmer, 9533 7th East in Sandy as well. I just want to echo what they've said. I stand up here and I saw you guys, your reaction of how you guys were being told what to do with the ADA and the single housing. Your actions are kind of similar to ours. You don't like to be told how to get things done retrospect after. What happened to us is we were invited from you guys. Hey, we got a phone call from staff saying, hey, come and join us, come join our annexation. Met with Gordon earlier in February. We looked at all the things to see if it would work, if it would pass, if everything would pencil and everything would be okay. What we're hearing tonight is all of a sudden, it's not going to work, that's not what we're going to stand by, forget the invitation. It's very upsetting that it can just be changed overnight. I think you guys kind of felt that same way as Mr. Christensen was saying. That's just wrong. It's just not how it should be done. So, like you said, Mr. McCumber, we don't want to fix all of the federal government's problems. We're asking that it start here right now. You guys don't create the same problems for us and allow us to continue what we've started as the invitation was extended from Saratoga City. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no additional comment, I will close the public hearing portion. We'll start with Councilman Porter. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think I covered a lot of my concerns. Just for clarification, if it's okay with council, is the issue you guys have with the administrative rejection of applications, is that the section is giving you heartburn, or I can't imagine that your guys are having heartburn over the 8 people living in a...
No, Councilman Porter, I think their problem is the fact that they don't have that vested right when they put an application in. They get guaranteed, right now they have the code.
But that's included in that section for the administrative rejection. I understand that concern, but was there...
If I may, so I believe that first of all, I hear their concerns about that administrative rejection of applications language. That's going to be further vetted with the Planning Commission. We can relook at that. I can give Mr. Carlson a phone call and hear his concerns in further detail. I believe that they're concerned about the next item, which is the change in the engineering standards, because they're vested right now under the prior version of this code. The engineering standards isn't the case, because that was, the process to amend those was started before their application came in.
But in reality, they have no vesting as of yet.
Oh, that's true. They don't have any vesting right now because they have not filed a preliminary application. They are asking for vesting, though, under this annexation agreement, which Nora is going to discuss. But really, there shouldn't be anything in these changes that negatively impact their development.
Right.
We didn't change.
That was my feeling, and so I was a little confused when they were talking about the code changes affecting their development. I didn't necessarily see that happening.
Right.
The actual development standards are on the very few changes to the development standards in this round of Title 19 changes. Now, the engineering standards is a different thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Wilden.
I think that answered my question. I mean, I think I've already said the 19 brought up before I'm supporting. I should go through it and vet out. Appropriate.
I actually did say it flat out. I even specifically asked why the Planning Commission decided to table it, and I'm looking forward to hearing their advice when they have a chance to review it. So I was never planning on voting on that today.
Councilwoman Barch.
So about 8 quick things. 1903-01 and 2, just the language of addressing the concerns. So right now it says if concerns are raised during the recommendation process, the applicant will be expected to have the concerns addressed and resubmit corrected new information, et cetera. It should be that that they address the concerns instead, because it's not going to be staff and council that is going to fix the problem. It's going to be the applicant that's going to fix the problem. And that's the same on the one just below in 3B as well.
Yeah, so I actually can see that. It doesn't specify who is going to address those issues.
And it's not us that addresses those. They have to take it back and fix it.
So that's an easy fix.
Exactly.
So let's
the way it
just
sounds right now,
specify.
it makes it like we have to fix the problem, but we're not the ones that have to fix it.
So I just need to specify the subject, and that's the applicant, not the Planning Commission or Council. Good point.
Okay. On 1903-05-2, when you're talking about, get there, sorry. 1903-05-2, yes.
Okay.
So this is powers and duties of the Planning Commission. In number 2, you talk about the land use, but you never talk about the zoning maps. They also have to pay attention to the zoning maps and documents, which are not the same as the land use.
So yeah.
Yeah, so that needs to be added back in.
Okay. Let's see.
It's separate. The land use map is included in the land use element of, the zoning map changes sometimes without having changed.
Okay, sure.
That, unless I'm wrong, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but.
Or changes to the zone.
Yeah, my intent was just to make this more general because we were saying pertaining to conditional use permits. So that's an easy fix. They have to comply with the general plan and the zoning maps.
And zoning maps, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. On the next page, 1903-072, this is just not proper English, like at all. And I realize this isn't something we've changed, but it would be really good to fix it so we actually are speaking proper English and making things make more sense. So for example, you could say, the Planning Commission shall take action to approve or deny a land use application by the powers as the land use authority that have been granted them in accordance with the terms and use regulations of the city. The way it's stated, though, that makes absolutely no sense.
So change have to has, is that what you're saying?
Well, there's a whole bunch, because it's, you have several items here that don't actually agree with each other, so.
Yeah, so we can, as staff, as just the authority that we have per Title I of the code, and actually Utah code as well, we can make those grammatical corrections.
Okay, we'll talk then after.
So yeah, we should. If there's any of those places where it's not affecting substance and it's just, we put have instead of has, obviously that's not substantive. We can make those corrections.
Okay, perfect, thank you. On 1903-13, hearing examiner procedure, it says on one that upon receipt of the complete application, is that every completed application, or is the planning director has to notify the hearing examiner, or is that just the completed appeal application?
Yeah, no, it's the it's the appeal application.
Do we need to specify that since this section now is not titled hearing examiner appeal procedure?
Sure, yeah.
So add the word appeal in there, thank you. On the next section within the appeal hearing also, it says a reasonable time, yet above it says 45 days at one point, it says 30 days at one point, so to have reasonable time versus a fixed time frame doesn't make much sense. It makes more sense to use specific dates, because
Okay.
reasonable is very subjective.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time catching up to you there.
Sorry, 1903-14.
1903 what?
1903-14.
14.
Appeal. So in number one, it says affix a reasonable time for a hearing, and that needs to be an actual number, not a subjective word. Is what I think is reasonable, the developer may not think is reasonable.
Yeah, that's a good point. Say we...
So above, we talked about 45 days and 30 days. So whatever we end up with up in the other section should be repeated here.
Yeah, good point. So just make sure the timeline or the deadlines in 13 are included in 14.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be shall not exceed?
Exactly.
So we'll just, we'll
Yeah,
say...
so shall not exceed whatever it is.
Right. And so, okay, I see what that, so public meeting...
And part of it's going to be set out by state code when the public hearing has to be done. They always have time frames for public hearings, the state code does.
Yeah.
And part of that can be by what we've already put into our code.
Yeah, sounds good. So just incorporate the same language from the previous section. Okay, perfect.
And then in 1903-16, the next section, how do we issue our written decision? Is that set out someplace in our bylaws? Is that set out in our other code someplace? What is the written decision? Is that when our minutes are published? Is that when the YouTube video goes live? What is that actual written
For the hearing
decision?
examiner.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we typically what I've seen done is there's findings of fact and conclusions of law that have to meet the substantial evidence standard. And Yeah, I see what you're saying. What would you propose we add there?
Just that it's going to be whatever that standard is. If it's the minute our minutes are published or whatever that written document is, how does that person know what that written document is?
So the hearing examiner doesn't have to do minutes?
It says that our recorder takes minutes, actually, in the hearings stuff up above.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't think that was the intent of, that it be treated as an open and public meeting, but.
I think it has to be.
Okay, so we just need to resolve that inconsistency about when the final decision is entered, or the decision is considered a final decision. Yeah.
Okay. And then the last one that I have is in 1913-11-3.
1913-11? Okay, so this is the one the Planning Commission did table, but I would be happy to bring
That's right, I'm sorry, you're correct, it did. Yes. So this is, although I'm not sure why they did this particular section, this is in 3A, and they, I think, tabled all the power line information. And this isn't power line, this is access points and addition of roads, addition of access points after a certain number. Okay. So when they get there, this is one of the things that I actually talked with the fire chief about after our last meeting, and he said that absolutely within a mixed use or a PC type of a zone, that the commercial traffic counts needed to be added into that. So it's not just the 50 residential units, it has to include the additional traffic that the commercial adds in there. So for example, a certain mixed use development that we were talking about earlier, when you add another business in there, they should be mandated to add in that second access point. So that's something that needs to be changed.
Second access based on actual vehicle counts instead of
whatever the ERUs are, the equivalent, equivalent residential units, whatever that is for that business, that needs to be added to that 50.
So what
counted in that 50. So it's 30. Exactly. If it's 30 homes and 3 businesses, whatever those ERUs are, they need to be added to that.
Oh, that's interesting because I do have that change in here. Instead of saying residential units, it's just referred to as units. That is something I should have mentioned in the list of policy considerations.
But units, it doesn't say ERUs, and it doesn't talk about the commercial aspect of things.
Do you want to say equivalent residential units then?
I know we're tabling it, but.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Let's make sure he takes.
Oh, sorry, this is not, my bad, hang on. Sorry, this is not 1913, I'm sorry, this is 1912-6. I was looking at the wrong one. Super sorry. Yeah, I do have that one also. Sorry. I've totally lost it, yes, no. Sorry about that, I jumped ahead. 1912-6-1F. Sorry about that. I totally led you astray. I know it is. It's on page 24 of the packet, if that helps. Yeah, so this is F, access, and then specifically I.
Now your comments make more sense.
Sorry about that. Okay, so it says the total number of units, including adjacent developments and neighborhoods served by a single means of access will exceed 50. However, units still almost always refers just to residential. Unless you specifically call out commercial ERUs, you're not going to, the lawyer in you is going to want to say that we can't do that. And the fire chief says we need to.
So you're saying change units to equivalent residential units? Okay. And then Jeremy was talking about maybe we can have some standards for trip counts. That'll be for another day, another discussion.
Absolutely. So when, yeah. So that's on that one, and that's, they haven't tabled that one. So if we can do that now, do the ERUs on that one, that'd be great. And
sure.
Yeah. And then when they get to power lines, on that one that I was talking about before as far as the reference, sorry about that. It talks about the pole at the end of the line, basically. And I want to make sure that that's just temporary, that they will be required, or the next development that comes in, however that's going to work out, will be required to then bury that. So we don't have one pole sticking up when everything else is buried. Just saying. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So that's just something that they need to discuss on that one.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to give you the wrong reference point. I'm glad you figured out I was giving you the wrong one. That's it.
With that, I would take a motion.
Okay. Ready?
But before you do so, would
Yes,
you like me to read off all the changes that I had on my list?
Sure.
Okay, or you have them?
Well, I
Okay.
have, go ahead.
Okay, whatever you'd prefer. If you want to just make it part of the motion, perfect.
Do you want to just make sure that I've hit them all as we go through it?
Yeah, I'll just verify, yeah.
Okay. I move that we approve the city code amendments, titles 13, oh, this is the wrong one, Title 19, Ordinance 17-17 dated today, tabling 1913-11 and 1903-2, directing staff to remove, to revisit the structure language in 1925 1D, also to resolve 1903-16-1, and also to change 1927-025B per Kevin's comments from legislative standards to administrative standards, also to change 1905-195A and C from city council to hearing examiner, and also to make the changes that council discussed and agreed upon tonight.
And the shall.
Including the shalls, because we discussed it, yeah.
Okay,
Do you want me to call out specifically the ones we talked about?
probably, yeah.
So that would be 1903-01 A and B, 1903-02 5, 1903-5 2, adding zoning map. Discuss that one, we don't have to do that one. 1903-13-1, adding complete appeal application. 1903-14-1, resolving the reasonable language to be consistent with the rest of the code. 1903-16-1, which one was that?
That was the one where there was the issue of when is the final decision made?
Oh, yes, what actually is a written decision, thank you.
Make sure that those are consistent with Open and Public
Yep,
Meetings Act.
thank
yeah.
you. 1912-6-1, make sure the access count includes ERUs and the commercial traffic.
We didn't specifically say the 3 spots where will.
And all of
The shall wills.
change all of the wills to shall.
Yeah. That were
That
highlighted.
have been highlighted within our packet. Thank you.
Then I have one more with the reasonable accommodation that those decisions be made by the hearing examiner.
And to change the reasonable accommodation that those will be made by the hearing examiner.
Yeah, you got it. Perfect.
Councilman Barch?
I'll second that.
I have a second from Councilman McComber. Any further discussion on this? Do a roll call. Councilwoman Barch?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
McComber?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Good job, Kevin, on this, but Mark, you put Kevin first. I'm just pointing that out.
I thought Kimber was still here.
So we're going to change the items up a little bit and go to business item 5. We have our Alpine School Board Representative Paula Hill and Rob Smith, our superintendent, assistant superintendent here tonight for a presentation.
Good. Well, I'm going to highlight a couple of things.
They're little lapel pins that say Alpine School District Spirit of Excellence, Honor, Courage, and Achievement.
Public haven't seen our stakeholders. But just wanted to highlight a few things, good things going on in your district. First of all, appreciate Board Member Paula Hill being here with me tonight. She said, Rob, when you go, please make sure I'm invited. And I'm so grateful, Paula and our board in general, they are very active in your schools. This morning at our opening administrative conference day today, all of our board members were there, engaged in supporting the efforts that we're making as we start and get ready for a new school year. It's right around the corner. So again, Rob Smith, Assistant Superintendent and Business Administrator for Alpine, and just wanted to highlight a few of the great things going on in Alpine School District. You as members of the council, our mayor, staff, members of the community, you are what makes Alpine School District great. It's our families, it's our students, it's teachers working with parents to support learning of students. And that's why we passed out that little pin to each one of the council members. Normally I'm talking, hey, will you do this, will you do that? We wanted to come just share a few highlights and then open it up for you to ask questions of me, or things that I can take back, things that you're hearing, things that we need to improve on, things that we need to work together on. And then finally, I just wanted to invite the council to meet with our board, possibly in a work session, similar to what we did over at our building. Maybe we do that here at some time where it's convenient, maybe over lunch, and we talk about joint issues. We would like to do that on a fairly regular basis so things don't fester, if you will, but that we can work on those things earlier in the process, especially as we continue to grow at a very rapid rate. So now I'm going to just highlight a couple of things here in the stakeholders report. Some great results in that top right corner, how Alpine performs as compared to the state of Utah. If we were to throw in another bar and show how we compare nationally, excellent results. Again, great students, working hard, great parents and families, and great educators that are doing their best to inspire student learning. Right below that, you can see AP results. The great thing for parents is we have students take, prepare, and pass those exams. Not only is that a great thing, a lot of learning that goes on, but that's a lot of money saved as they go to college. Alpine School District's been on the AP honor roll for the past 4 years, and that is a rare achievement as you look at school districts. Of the 13,000 school districts nationally, for us to be on that honor roll consecutively, pretty exciting thing for us. Graduation rates right there in the center. You can see how we rate. We had one of our schools this past year achieve a 97% graduation rate. And how difficult that is. We have to measure students entering at 9th grade and then exiting as a senior. And we have to track every one of those students. That's the cohort we have to measure. And when you look at some of our special ed populations, some of those students will not graduate. Like my daughter, who has cerebral palsy, she got a certificate of completion. So when you back out the students that cannot or will not achieve graduation, to have one of our schools in Alpine achieve 97%, pretty remarkable what we're trying to do. A couple other things there. AAA bond rating as the business guy, I'm always excited about. That means that our district is taking care of your money. It is your money in a prudent manner, a conservative manner. And the other facts there, again, are very good, but just highlight a few things that your district's doing well. A couple of things I would just like to mention in addition to that. I want to express appreciation for our late council member, Podeska. I appreciated working with him over the years, especially on education issues, and I thought it appropriate on behalf of Alpine School District, our board, our superintendent, and Rob Smith personally. I'm grateful for Bud, and he will be missed. Next, I just wanted to say thanks for your help in getting Springside last year. Wow, 7 months. I still am challenged by people saying, Rob, how did you do that? We could not have done that without the support of Mark Christensen, your staff, and you. So, pretty exciting. I was there visiting with the principal as they led to year 2, and we have people coming from all over the state and even outside the state. How did you build an elementary school, 50, 60-year school in 7 months? Again, a lot of that I would credit you and our team in making that happen.
Rob?
Yes, sir.
Could we not do that again?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But it was, so that leads me, that's a great transition, Mark. Thank you, into the next session. I was going to talk about growth. We're going to meet tomorrow about a junior high school. We're working on property acquisition, working through a few issues with the city. You've seen Frank Poley, our physical facilities director, that's come. We're going to meet tomorrow and talk about a few issues. We are acquiring property both in the north and in the south area of Saratoga Springs for future school sites. We have worked with your city administrator in identifying likely places as development is approved by the council. I just would like to, again, put a plug in that. As those projects come, if we can account for that as infrastructure up front, it makes it much easier for us as we look to build schools in the right place and have the infrastructure there, similar to what we did with D.R. Horton in Springside. That's a great project. It's one of our best. And again, I credit the planning process in that. And then finally, we were at Vista Heights today as they prepare for a lot of students next year, which is why that middle school conversation tomorrow is going to be critical. Paula and I were there moving desks, chairs, and getting classrooms set up. It's a tradition that we have our administrators go into the schools and work for the custodians on projects like that as we set up and prepare for new classrooms for new students. But 2 satellite units on that campus. We're going to have a lot of kids, which is why this new middle school needs to get under construction as soon as possible. Most of you know that site is in the north area or south area, but north area of just north of the hills, right in between the 2 churches. So west of Redwood Road. So anyway, that's something that, again, we're going to be talking about tomorrow. But subject to your questions, those were the things I had prepared to come share. Again, thank you for, invite you to work with us, maybe in a work session, Mayor Miller, something that might be convenient that you could coordinate with your team. But please let me know. And we'd love to set that up twice a year, once a year, whatever's convenient for you. But we'd like to do that in a work session so the dialogue can be more open between our board and the council.
Perfect.
Okay? And then questions that you have for me?
I was going to say twice a year would be great. As a council, we've been very blessed with Paula Hill. She stays in touch with all of us pretty regularly and listens to us share frustrations from our community. So that is really great for Alpine School District, but it would be great to talk with the administration there. And just kind of on behalf of the council and stuff, I know you've got 2 of your board members here tonight with you. It's been, Michael and I, we started working with you 6-7 years ago with the bus yards and schools and that. Your professionalism has always been great, even as we've pushed and questioned and disagreed, and we look forward to working with Alpine School District going forward on behalf of the residents, and continuing that relationship has been greatly appreciated. Your willingness to help meet our goals for the community that were addressed by residents when we did our community outreach study as to where they want Saratoga to go, what they want it to look and feel like. And that's really, as a council, what we drive everything to, is back to the residents' wishes. And that survey, I don't know if you heard, but that was one of the highest participated in surveys that company has ever had involved as far as feedback. So we appreciate you listening to our concerns with that. Council have anything else? Councilman McComber?
So again, excited to see the growth happening. We obviously the middle school is needed. I do like how you're good marketers, and Westlake you broke into 2 lines so that it wasn't so obvious that there's 16,000 people in your enrollment cluster. That was pretty smart, just break up Westlake by the 2 middle schools there. How is the Cedar Fort Fairfield Eagle Mountain High School coming?
If you'd like, I'd meet you at the site. There's scaffolding up. It's on schedule, actually a little ahead of schedule. Footings and foundations. We had slab poured, a little bit of slab poured last week, and they're going vertical. So, yes, we're moving.
Anticipate fall of 18 still?
Fall of 19.
19.
Right. High schools are a 2-year build. It's a 340,000 square foot facility, and then all of the amenities that support a high school with their extracurricular and community events that we host there. So yeah, Westlake, just to further west is basically what it is.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that it's important that Fairfield and Cedar Fort don't get swallowed up, just like Westlake didn't become Saratoga Springs High School. I just want to make sure that is remembered, that Cedar Fort and Fairfield should not be swallowed up and have that be Eagle Mountain High School. I mean, American Fork, Lehigh, Orem, some of those old historical schools, they were for those entire community. They're a small constituent, they're not even my constituents, but that was something that we were really sensitive about when we did Westlake, and we want to make sure that that same thing happens there for that situation. So Cedar Valley or whatever it is, I'm not saying that what it is, but something that represents the community, just like Westlake really has become. It was a really bonding moment for Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs because there was a lot of between the two, and when that became one and Westlake, it really did help. I mean, granted, most of those students, because some of the kids still from Eagle Mountain will probably be still going to Westlake when you break out all of your barriers, I mean your borders eventually, because some of that are so close. So I just want to make sure that, and then for me personally, what are the plans, because I hear this a lot right now, especially, I don't know, you know, the circumstances that I'm in, my term ends in this December. I'm talking to a lot of residents. What are the plans for Westlake this year? And I mean, and Vista in particular, with the fact that you have 2018, this is the 2017, 2018, you still have the 2018 to 2019. Because when we first built Westlake, it was, oh yeah, we built these wings so that they could be added on, they can add another wing out, and none of that happened. We're just now working on these other high school. So what are the plans? Just more mobile units, or how are we going to help make sure these kids don't get lost? Because I want to keep these numbers high.
Great question. I met with Gary Twitchell, the principal, and Courtney Johnson, who's the new principal that will be of the soon to be named, or actually about a year and a half from now, to be named high school in Eagle Valley. Met with both of them 2 weeks ago. I asked them that specific question. Are we ready for kids? And what support do you need to be ready for kids? As far as classroom space, we have the classroom space. As far as teachers, we're staffed. We don't have some of our special education staff hired yet, but that's always an issue because we don't have as many teachers coming out of the college preparation programs, and when they do, they're often recruited speech and language pathologists by competitors. And I'll throw out just one, Intermountain Healthcare, or other providers where they can make a higher salary and have a smaller caseload. So when we do get them, we have to compete to keep them. But as far as classroom space, we're ready. As far as teachers, we're ready. They have some classrooms that are not rotating for next year. They have 4 teachers that are rotating where they have their cart with their materials, their computer, their projector, whatever instructional technology they need, and they go into a classroom during a teacher's prep time. And those teachers then have a home base or a place where they have a conference room where they can prep and work together during their prep time. But we're trying to utilize the space to its fullest. We do have some possibilities there for the following year, and we'll monitor that this year. We'll see how many students actually show up. We know what our projections are. We do that, and we're actually quite accurate with our projections. Last year we were about 0.5% off. When you think about 78,000 students, 0.5%, it's a pretty small number. But we'll monitor that this fall and see what additional help needs to happen for the following year. Vista's the same. We did pull in another satellite. You saw that right adjacent to the satellite we brought in last year. Again, that was where I was carrying desks for a good 3 hours this morning. I'm a little sore. I'm not quite as young as I used to be. But we're ready. We have some space. We also have additional portable space that we could bring classroom space in for Vista until the middle school's built. That middle school, if it starts in January again, it'll be 1.5 years before it opens. Fall of 19 is what our target is for the middle school.
My last comment is obviously educating the children is the #1 priority, but you still have to feed them and you have to provide. There's 3 lunches at Vista. There's talk of going to 4. At Westlake, I went in there during lunch, and I don't know how you're passing fire code with the...
They're not.
So I just want to make sure that we're also keeping our children safe, and if that means that we need to use tents, have them outside when the weather's permitting, something, because if something was to happen, if there was going to be an event, which we all hope that will never happen at one of our schools, we've had it happen at one of our schools while I've been a city council member. My concern is trampling, exiting issues. It was very scary. I'm a tall person, and I was scared when I was walking through there. I could barely move as I was walking through the common area where the food was being served. So I think we also just need to make sure, and I know that bonds and all the things and timing and stuff, but you know, we are continuing to grow as a community. We are constantly getting more and more applications. When the temple was announced, we got an influx of even more. We have developments that were sort of sitting idle come back to us and say, oh, guess what? You know, that 1,200 homes that you didn't think were going to happen for 15 years, we want to start in a year. So, to Guayo. And so we just want to make sure that we are always looking at all the different things that are happening within our community. I support twice a year because Saratoga Springs will either be your bane or your success story like Springside. We can be a huge, like you could wear a hat of pride or a hat of shame if we don't stay in good communication. So thank you.
Let me address two of those things. I'd love to know if you know the location of the temple. I don't know if that's been disclosed yet, but
often asked.
Well, I get asked probably at least once a week. Hey, Rob, you're out there looking at this. I said, well, it's somewhere in Saratoga Springs. So, and they usually like a view. So that's usually what I've said. But the question the comment you made about why Westlake's broken into two. Let me address that specifically. That wasn't to try to shrink the numbers. One of the things in Alpine that we do to get more input from principals, teachers, and parents is we break the district, a large district that has some good economy of scale, into smaller pieces. Because Westlake was a large school, we said let's break that, and we knew that the high school would be under construction in Eagle Valley. Let's break that into two smaller pieces so that we can engage more principals, engage more parents, and break a large organization into smaller pieces. So the voices of the Saratoga residents that feed through Vista Heights would have a voice similar to those that would be through Frontier that feeds to Westlake. So that was the board, superintendent, their attempt to take a large organization and break it into smaller pieces to engage more people. And the superintendent, board members, you know, Scott and Paula, they're awesome. They show up to everything. They go and they listen, and they get that feedback from the boots on the ground, and we make, you know, from that feedback, make decisions and provide support. So that's why we did it that way, is we actually created those additional clusters, is what we call them, so that we could get more feedback and input. Whatever the high school, and again, every week, I don't know if you knew, but I sold my house in Highland. I thought the growth is so much fun out west, I'm going to join you. And so we moved out to Eagle Mountain about a year ago. And yeah, every week I get asked or a suggestion for colors or a mascot or something about the high school. And then the last question I always hear is there going to be artificial turf? I think that's the four things I hear about the new high school. So anyway, thank you.
All right. I think one of the great things about our current council makeup is we've got, I think, somebody at almost all the elementary schools, not quite, but so I've got a couple elementary school questions. I know you guys are working on procuring land, and I know you guys are trying to keep up with the insane amount of growth that we're seeing out here. So the two schools that I hear about are Riverview and Thunder Ridge, because I live in the Thunder Ridge neighborhood and my daughter attends Riverview, so, and my wife's involved with the PTA there. So Riverview, I know the biggest concern is with Lehigh building the exchange up on 2100 North.
And then Holbrook Farms.
And on the Holbrook Farms across the way. That all, I believe, falls into Riverview's.
It is.
Current area
Riverview
of
boundary.
Responsibility, and those are, I mean, they've started to go vertical, and so you're going to have homes, people live, knowing the way Edge builds, you're going to have people in there in a couple of weeks. But, so there's a lot of concern. I know all of the schools are overcrowded in Saratoga Springs, but, or very crowded. I won't say overcrowded, but very crowded. But there's a lot of concern from the parents as to where all these new students are going to go.
Okay, let me address that first. We acquired property in Holbrook Farms, and so we have an elementary school site there on the north side of 2100 North. We're currently negotiating on 2 sites on the south side of 2100 North. So one is purchased and district has ownership for. That's where you see the homes on the north side going vertical right now. And then on the south side, we're working. And so that will address the Riverview boundary. And as I met with Matt Diaz, principal of Riverview, the other day, he said, bless you, thank you. I hear that guy. So
I know
he's probably heard from you and maybe many others. Let me address Thunder Ridge. There are 2 schools, elementary schools under construction right now. One is in North Lehigh and one is in Eagle Mountain, which is right on the boundary of Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs. And that elementary school, south of Ridley's, just east and south of the Silver Lake, actually just west of Silver Lake, south of Silver Lake, closer to the Candlelight Homes development that's going in there. It's on Golden Eagle, I think is the road. There's a church right there, then some multifamily units, and then the school's just adjacent to that in the Evans Ranch area. That'll open next fall. And the boundary committee, the board approved 2 weeks ago to start the boundary process. And that will be one of the schools that's looked at. And the schools that will be impacted by that will be Thunder Ridge. It will be in Eagle Mountain, Pony Express, and Black Ridge. And so 2 other schools that are large, Thunder Ridge being the one in Saratoga that you're concerned with, you will see that student population decrease with that boundary process. What it will look like, I don't know, but your planner, your folks here will be invited to that. I don't know if the letters have come out already, but I know John Patton, the other assistant superintendent, was preparing those invites to those boundary meetings for this fall. And then that'll be decided by the board in January. So I think you've got relief.
Right.
And this past bond that was passed by our voters at a really high percentage. Again, we thank all of you who got out and the support, especially from Lehigh, Saratoga, Eagle Mountain, off the charts. We have 9 schools that we're building, and many of those in this west area.
The concern I hear regarding Thunder Ridge is more in line with, again, Edge Homes and their Mount Saratoga development.
We have
the speed that they build, they're beginning to build.
Talus Ridge.
Mount Saratoga is I believe,
we have
100 homes.
We have a letter of intent signed with Edge for a school site in that development as well.
Okay. But I just, I knew that they had planned that. I wanted to make sure you guys were moving forward on that.
If I'm not mistaken, the first phase will provide infrastructure for the area where they have their LOI.
Okay.
Correct.
And then this is, I guess, more for council. We had talked at the beginning about there being a vacancy as far as the liaison for the Alpine School District. I'm happy to, since everybody thought I was doing it anyway, I'm happy to take that on. But I figured since they're here, maybe it's nice to. I can take over in the meantime. Yep. Just, I figured while they're there, at least let them know that somebody, who to contact if they have a question.
That'd be great. And again, I'm the liaison for Alpine. My cell, 801-850-3595. The mayor has it. But council members reach out to me if there's anything. That's one of the responsibilities the board has given me, and that's why I'm here. You'll see me coming to your meetings on a fairly regular basis, and just giving reports and then entertaining questions from you.
Right.
What we can do to work better together.
All right.
Okay.
And I'm supportive of the 2 times a year work session. I think that'd be great. Arch?
Just a couple of quick questions just on projects that you've kind of had sitting out there a little bit. As you're building, first of all, the new high school out in the Cedar Valley area, are you planning on building a bus yard along with that? Because ours is overflowing and out of compliance.
Great question. We have property on the west side of that school for a potential transportation facility.
That's great. And then along those lines, because of the proximity to the bus yard to Thunder Ridge and Horizon specifically, the residents there have had lots of issues with buses driving through their neighborhood without, they're not picking up those kids. Those kids all walk to school. Empty buses, and they're not paying attention to the kids in the park, on the road, on the sidewalks, et cetera. So those buses really need to stay out of that neighborhood unless they're actually servicing that neighborhood. And yes, it will take them a minute longer to get around on 400 North, but they really need to stay out of that neighborhood for safety purposes, if that would.
I will take that back.
Down to 15.
I will
It's
take
true.
that, I will take that back to Jess Christian. I no longer supervise transportation.
But I knew
That's
you
the
knew
change.
who would.
But I will take it back and we'll pass that along. Thank you.
And then just one more on project that you've got. The second phase of that whole bus yard facility was going to be an additional, I believe, softball field and a technical school and some other things like that, along with a natural gas filling station. I just didn't know if you had been talking about when that second phase might happen.
It's on hold.
Okay. That's it. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll take classrooms.
Seriously.
That's been our focus.
Cafeterias.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Wilden asked for just a few seconds. He'd like to volunteer as the new mascot for the new high school.
Sure, I take lots of beatings, so, I don't have any additional questions. I appreciate when we met with you last time, we got some information on the bond. I think it was certainly a great thing, and we got the bond passed and then increased benefit to the children out here. And so I'm supportive, so that we can work actual message out there, as we all.
Mark?
Mayor and Council, just as another update, on August 10th, we've invited the principals of all the schools to come and meet with us in kind of the annual growth update that we've been doing with them in the past. And so that'll be at 2 o'clock here, if any of you would like to join us for that. But we've invited all the principals, and we have that queued up. And this is kind of where their jaws hit the floor when they realize all of the development that's in the pipeline. And so, looking forward to that as well.
Will you be there, Rob?
I'll be there.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, if there's nothing else, we
Thank you.
really appreciate your time. Okay, we will go back to the public hearings. The engineering standards and specific revisions ordinance. Yes.
You probably all want to go home. I do, but I'm never able to come to your council meetings because they're the same night as board meeting. But tonight we had a banquet, and they finished with this rock band. Now, you have to remember, my generation invented rock and roll. It was not my music, so we left and came over here. I think back to when I first met Michael, and Jim sat in my living room explaining why I should vote for them and convincing me to vote for Mia. Mia? Of course, I'm devoted to Mia now. It wasn't very long until they were sitting in my living room asking me to run for school board. And here I am, and here you are. The only comment I really have to add to this is that one reason that Rob brought up the meeting with the city is that I have been a real nuisance. I'm regularly asking, why are we not meeting with Saratoga Springs? Why are we not meeting with Eagle Mountain? I represent both cities and Cedar Valley, of course, and Fairview, but we don't, they're pretty little for a meeting. But we have met with Eagle Mountain more regularly than Saratoga Springs. I go to the meetings with Lehigh, and I go to the meetings with Orem, and I think, no, we have to have meetings with our city because so much is happening out here. I guess you know that. So I just wanted to add that. I heard several of you supporting having a couple of meetings a year, and just remember that it's been my constant push. I appreciate the things the city council does. I've met with, of course, Michael and Jim. I used to meet with them in the halls at church. Not they kept dividing us off till now I don't even see them anymore. But I think I know you all personally, and I appreciate your efforts, and I appreciate your support for the school district. And thank you for some kind words that were said tonight. I love my husband to hear those. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the meeting where you said Cedar Fort and Fairfield are a little smaller, if we invited them to a meeting with us for the update, Mark, could we at least extend the invitation if they have interest to get updates? Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much. Okay, now back to the engineering standards and specification revision ordinance, 17-18.
The portion of the meeting we've all been looking forward to, right? Okay, so this was tabled from last time in an effort to have a public hearing on the item. So won't give much introduction, simply that we revise the engineering standards from time to time. It's been a couple of years at least, and in that course of time we find little things that we'd like to change, things that better represent good engineering practice, better represent the interests of the city, and so forth. And so those changes are reflected here. Now, these changes are a result of quite a collaborative effort among many city staff. I hope I can answer most of your questions. Some of your questions I might not be able to because of the specific nature of some of these things. I might not know the answer, but we'll see how that goes. One small change that I want to add tonight, and I'll hand you this page. The change is in the culinary, the drinking water section. In the drinking water section, dead-end mains shall not exceed 600 feet in length. And the purpose for that is verbatim from the National Fire Protection Agency. It's twofold, one for fire flow and the other for water quality. Long dead-end lines, water sits there and becomes stagnant, and that becomes a problem. So I'll hand this to you. One other item I want to mention, at the bottom of these pages in your packet or in the file here, you'll see text over text. And the reason for that is all of these changes are proposed changes in the word processing software. And so things like formatting, things like this will be resolved once those changes are accepted. So just a clarification there. So let me hand this change to you, and then I'll sit at the table and we'll be pleased to entertain your questions.
Kevin, just one quick question I had. Councilwoman Barch was mentioned in the last one about establishing a later effective date, but then with pending ordinance, things already comply to it. How do you reconcile those two?
So really, that's just up to your legislative discretion. The pending ordinance doctrine is basically, it's kind of a safeguard that, it's an exception to the vested rights doctrine, which in Utah, it's an early vesting. It's when the complete application is filed and all application fees are paid. The legislature's created this exception if we've already initiated proceedings prior to that petition or that application being filed. They're subject to that pending ordinance. And that's important because we're such an early vesting state. But as far as establishing an effective date of an ordinance, that happens all the time. You are more than welcome to do that, subject to your, that's your legislative discretion. The Utah State Legislature does that all the time. Feel free to do that if that's one of your, if that's, it's really up to your discretion.
The pending ordinance, is that more of a common practice among communities throughout Utah?
It is, like I said, it's to help assist in, because this is a lengthy process. You got to go planning commission, council, and all the public hearings.
We're not a one-off anomaly with it.
No, absolutely not. It's in state law. The pending ordinance doctrine is there. It has been for a very long time. And our code has laid out the process for defining when there is a pending ordinance. So the state statute requires us to do that, to say we have to define what a pending ordinance is, and that's what we've done.
We are following state code?
Yes, we are following state code.
Perfect. Okay, sorry for the sidebar. We will open the public hearing on the engineering standards and specification revision ordinance 17-18. Is anybody here for the public hearing? Add comments? If you please come up and state your name and address for the record.
Scott Carlson, 2264 North, 1450 East in Lehigh. I'm surprised that the engineering and the title changes don't have this flood of people that are interested in reading through and going through these things. I recognize that there are a lot of these changes that are simply just keeping up to date. Appreciate that, and it does suggest that times change and we need to stay with that. And sometimes there are items that were inconsistent or needed clarification or even correction, and I appreciate the staff that to correct inconsistencies in the code and in the design standards and such. On occasion, some of these are not just simply keeping up. One item that I wanted to talk about tonight was the road width standard. Standard drawing ST8 suggests that we will change the total right-of-way width from 56 feet to 59 feet. The justification for that has been described as an effort to keep up with the fire code. It's not a change in the fire code. The fire code's been the same for quite some time. Your open drivable space in the existing standard is 12 feet plus 12 feet plus 1.5 and 1.5 for that gutter pan. So you've got about 27 feet. That meets the current fire code if you have parking on one side of the street. If you want parking on both sides of the street, which I believe you do and most residents do, then you needed a little more space. And I think that's really the impetus behind this change in the code or in the standard design drawing, to provide enough space for people to park on both sides of the road while still allowing adequate travel space in between. That's not a bad idea, and I think a lot of residents will appreciate that. In the past, the discussion has been by keeping that constricted, then vehicles must drive a little slower. There's a lot of effort in this city to provide calming devices, traffic calming, and keep our traffic through residential neighborhoods a little slower and a little more carefully. This effort to widen 5 extra feet of asphalt will change that. My request to you is that rather than allowing that additional pavement to affect property, let's look a little harder at what we can reduce out. Already, the park strips are planned in this design drawing, ST8, to go from 9 feet down to 8 feet. Most of our other cities in this area have park strips of 4 feet or 5. As we've talked about that, one of the reasons for that wide park strip is for the water lines and the lines, the domestic water, what are you calling it now? Drinking water and the secondary water. Those water lines are inside that park strip, and it'll make it really nice and easy to dig them up, in 40 or 50 years when they're placed, if you have a really big wide park strip. My question to you is, are we going to make the decision about what we take today in an effort to make it really easy in 40 years? I'm going to suggest that better off if you make those park strips 6.5 feet each. So that'll keep your total right-of-way at 56 feet. I think 6.5 will be enough to address excavation if you need to fix a water line. And if it impacts the sidewalk for a section, there's going to be a little cost there. But I guess I'm talking about the whole cost for the road width versus a small cost for a section of sidewalk that might need to be moved and replaced many years from now. On a project of the size that we have, middle of, it's about 40 acres, and we have approximately 6,500 feet of road within our little 40 acres. It's only 120 lots. It's not one of these 1,000 lots that you got dealing with. But with 6,500 feet of road, widen that right-of-way by 3 feet. Well, sometimes you'd say, oh, that doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up. That's about almost 20,000 square feet. Our project, that's more than 2 lots. And of course, it'll come out in little strips all over the place. As we try and be efficient with our lots, just coming out, taking a little bit off the front of every lot, all of a sudden they don't meet the size requirements or whatever dimensions are needed for those lots, and so it moves. You shift that little 3 feet times 70, 75 feet. You're talking 200 square feet off of each lot, but you're going to shift that all the way down until you don't have a lot anymore. So it will make a big difference to us. For our project, we're already in it. And to accommodate a change in the design standard, that affects the project because the commitments to the landowners are already been made. So it's just simply takes all the opportunity out of the project. That the developer will have an opportunity to earn a little bit of money for the risk taken. That happens on not just our project, but all of the projects that you have that are currently in process. That'll be affected by this project, by this change. On future projects, developer will know. If he needs a 59-foot right-of-way, he'll know what he can get out of there, and so he just pays less to the farmer who he's buying the land from. Those farmers are your residents. We make a lot of effort to invite the neighborhood when we come before you. Annexation, preliminary plat, we have hearings, we send postcards to every property owner within several hundred feet, and they're notified that there's going to be new homes coming into their area. On a project or on a change like this, the notification doesn't require that. State requirements, just post it, you've got it in the website, you've got it on the board downstairs or wherever you post those. And there's a handful of things, but it's not necessarily the same level of effort. My suspicion is that your local farmers who have raised their families now getting ready to say agriculture doesn't fit in this community anymore, and so I'm on my way out. I'm going to go to south part of the county or wherever they're going. They're going to sell their land to a developer. They don't know that tonight they're about to lose money. You vote to change this from 56 to 59 feet on a project like ours with 40 acres, that's about a $400,000 impact. So it's about $10,000 an acre. Farmers that are out there do not know that the developer will pay them $10,000 an acre less because of a change of 3 feet right away. So you get a small farmer that's,
Just a question, do you have comments in regards to the new crossroad widths, more so than farmers in your development? This is more of a work session topic that you're describing.
It is.
So councilors, do you have something that's actually more to the item that is for public hearing?
This is the item for public hearing. This is
versus the land speculation and...
This is an item in your...
It is, but
changes that you're making.
Spend a little bit of time on land speculation, not so much on the code or the impact. I get it has impact to width. I get the 6,500 square feet, and I get the land speculation on value, but this isn't an ordinance on land speculation. This is an ordinance on engineering standards.
My point is, maybe you're misunderstanding my point. My point is that there are landowners here in this community that are not aware that this is going to impact them. They aren't staying in touch at the same level, those who are directly involved in a current project. I'm concerned about them. Well, they will be impacted, and they probably aren't even aware. It makes a difference to them. So I'd ask you to consider them. I realize we'll have a discussion about the project that we have and how we address that later tonight. But my suggestion is that for all projects, that might not be the right thing to do. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here for comments on the engineering standards? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing portion, and we will start with council discussion. Councilman McComber.
So obviously, this was another large packet. It's a good thing it's summer and I have more time to, I don't, wait, I have a job. I'm not out of school, but no, I mean, it was a lot. And I appreciate all of the efforts, and I know that you're representing multiple departments tonight. I appreciate your efforts and trying to speak on their behalf as well. For me personally, I'm not an expert. I'm not an engineer. I don't have an engineering degree, so I'm looking to you as an expert. That's why council have staff, right? We, as elected officials, aren't expected to be experts in all these areas. I do have opinions and things, but I don't really think that in this situation, opinion should really be enforced when it comes to engineering standards. I hope that you were being conservative. I hope that you weren't being excessive in your engineering standards. I know that the fire chief absolutely is not. He just wants to make sure that he can get the truck to people when he needs to in a safe and orderly manner. For me personally, I don't have a problem going to the 6.5-foot park strip. Me personally, I know other council members might, and I love to hear from them, and I love hearing their arguments, and I can be easily persuaded. If we can make a compromise, if we could figure out a way to not put all of the burden on the developer with that wider asphalt, sorry, the cross-section, not asphalt, the wider cross-section, because we're already putting the burden for wider asphalt, right? So then we were doing a double burden. Now they have more asphalt they have to lay, which is more expensive, and they're losing space. They're losing property. So I would like to, maybe if we could find a compromise to make it work, that would be great. So I was looking at some of the older neighborhoods in Saratoga Springs. They didn't have the huge park strips that we require now, and we've moved to bigger as the city. So, and I did notice that the trees looked really good, even though the park strip and the bushes and the things in the smaller park strips survived Saratoga Springs. I don't know if that's just unique to us, because I know that's another concern. Besides just the easy access to get in to change pipe later, we want to make sure that the vegetation can survive in those park strips. So for me, I think that that's probably the biggest point of contention, is this cross-section. A lot of the other stuff, I'm sure other council members found things, but when I was reading through it, my eyes glazed over many times. I wish that you guys can see. I mean, you can see up here, if they just start scrolling all the X's and the boxes, I mean, it was a lot to process. So for me, we hire staff that are going to represent us, and as soon as and Mark has said this to us many times, as soon as we don't trust you guys, we need to tell you, because if we don't trust you, then that's the concern, right? I do trust you. I trust you with your education as an engineer, and I trust the other department heads who've been working with you that affected their sections in here as well. So with that, I don't have any specific, other than that if we can find some kind of a compromise to make sure that we're not doing an exaction of $400,000 on a development that's relatively small. I know it sounds silly to think a 40-acre development is small, because that's not. In retro, you know what I mean? That's a decent sized development, but we've dealt with such large ones. I can't even imagine on some of these edge developments what this would mean in terms of costs for them, things. I know that they've grandfathered in, but I know they're looking at other land. There's another 2,000 acres of SLR property that hasn't been purchased. I know they are protected to some degree, but there's also just other developments as well. So just want to make sure that we're compromising. We don't just exact all the time. So thank you.
Gordon, I appreciate your work and effort on this. The only suggestion I would have, like maybe presentation, is in the future when you make updates, the other people that are updating it for you, make them submit like an executive summary to you that then you can compile and provide to us that way. And don't take that, I think what you do is great. That would just help in our review so that at least we're identifying. Here's the areas that you should pay attention to most. So. And why I'm saying, I know there's a lot of people that worked on it, so if you're coordinating it, just maybe tell them the mayor demands that they submit an executive summary or something like that, just to facilitate the reading. So don't take that as negative on this.
Sure. So just as a point of interest, we only included the pages that changed. So there was an effort in that regard.
No, I wasn't saying there wasn't. I know it's a huge project.
Well, maybe if I can double up on what you're saying is, if things were just fixing or updating to the current national standards and things like that that are really non-consequential, maybe a different color. And then the ones that are like, this cross section is the big thing, this is the one that's going to affect everyone, have that be red. You know what I mean? So
right, that's a great comment. Yes, thank you.
Because some of the stuff I was reading, I'm like, oh, well, we had to do that. We don't even, I can't even change it if I wanted to because it's like national standard requirements. So that's what I think you're getting at, right?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. And I just recommend that. I mean, a large portion of my job is presenting huge amount of changes to regulators, the Federal Reserve, our board of directors, and so I'm just trying to narrow them on to the things that are actually consequential. Helps that way. We'll keep Councilman Porter off wordsmithing certain items. The other thing, as far as the road cross sections go, I mean, we were thoughtful about increasing it because there has been concerns in areas, but I certainly understand that we don't want to overburden. So I support Councilman McComber's statements there, and I think about it from a homeowner. I have one of the bigger ones, and I hate it because I have to mow it. I have to go up and down 4 times. It's just, well, now my Boyd has to, but he gets paid for it. But from my understanding, maybe Mark, you can correct me on this, but a lot of cities actually bury their pipes under the road. Is that?
Yeah, it all depends on the community. Some communities have pipes under roadways. We've done it this way, and I see a tremendous wisdom in doing it the way that we are, because it allows us to have good access to it. It's not something that we've got road cuts and leaks that you can't find because it's, underneath a roadway and you can't locate it. So, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in the way that we've set up, and because we're a new community, it's working quite well. But I mean, you can move those utilities in other locations.
I wasn't suggesting we move
them.
Right. I was just, I think even if we shrunk it a little bit like we're talking about, it makes the space a little bit more restricted, but I think you can get equipment that will do. I don't think you're limited on
it. Will certainly depend on the size of pipe and things of that nature, but in general, it's okay. If I could interject, I think that there's been a whole lot of concern that has been raised about our standards and about what some of the things that we're doing that will really be questions that are going to be addressed with Nora's presentation in a little bit. And so, fundamentally, I get it, but I also think that in general the standards are the way that they are, and we don't need to run away from it. I know that the fire standards, that's why we're pushing for this wider cross section, because Chief Campbell, some of the challenges that we've had with parking, especially with multifamily parking and a lot of street parking, on-street parking, has caused a lot of problems for us across the city. And so this wider cross section is really designed for us to address the concerns that you've brought to us and we've discussed in the past. In fact,
doesn't this address that? It just makes the park strip smaller.
It does. However, we're also not, I think that there's some things that we consider for the transitionary issues that we're looking at. But in the future, having that standard just wider it really will keep a continuity amongst the rest of the city and its infrastructure.
Not already continuity, there's already a lot of smaller.
Well, and I guess for me, like, you know, it obviously impacts their development, but just looking at it in general, I mean, for me as a homeowner, that's where I even take it. For me personally, I feel like it's wasted space. I have to maintain it. I don't own it, and it's a lot of property. I'd rather have that somewhere else because there's we've fixed some of the restrictions and what we can do there. There just has to be live vegetation in some aspects. So looking at it from like a long-term 40-year perspective, I think we absolutely need to do that by maintaining it in the park strip. I think it does that. Just as a homeowner development aside, I personally don't like it. And, mine's wider than 8 foot, I think. I don't know, I wish mine was smaller than 8 foot. And I would guess that a lot of homeowners would feel the same. Similarly, there's areas that we don't have sidewalks. Have that. Fair point, but
still.
So it's for me, it's a little bit hard to segregate this, but from the other discussion.
Councilman Porter?
Oh, last thing.
Sorry.
I'm fine with pushing out an effective date.
Still me?
Yes.
All right. So on table 4, you went with 12%. I'm kidding. There's, a lot of very specific standards in here that are just meeting the new national standards. So I'm not going to get into that. As far as the road width, I agree with Councilman Wilden. I'm putting in my park strip right now, and I wish it was smaller because it's a pain in the butt to landscape 9 feet. But I also, I tend to agree with what Mark Christensen just said, is that, for developments going in, knowing what the standard is, it's less impactful than for maybe a development that was, midstream when this got changed. And so I'm willing to, as we're talking about later, I'm willing to, deal with the transition and maybe make some accommodation there. But, I feel very strongly that the road needs to be wider. The drivable surface area needs to be wider. I do not have a strong opinion as to whether it needs to be an 8 foot or a 6.5 foot park strip. So I can, as Councilman McComber said, I can be persuaded either way. There's if 6.5 is really going to be impactful to the city being able to maintain the, where is it that we're able to do it without damaging? I know that the testimony was trying to minimize the cost of replacing sidewalk, which is a small expense when you're replacing one block, but when you're doing it across an entire city, it becomes millions of dollars, and that's taxpayer money. That is something we have to be cognizant of. So if we can find it, if we can do the same amount of, work without destroying the sidewalks with a 7 foot park strip, I'm okay with that, but I don't know what that, I'd have to lean on staff's expertise to know where that happy medium is.
Yeah, and Jeremy's staff are going to have a solid opinion on that one as well, and so I would say, I don't know if Jeremy's spoken to this particular item, but he's certainly,
I would love to hear your strong opinion.
They would be offended if I didn't represent them. Best example I have is when we were just up in Nectar Way installing that water line. We were able to install that water line with minimal impact to the road because we were able to go on the park strip, and with sod you can have it repaired, very quickly. Those water lines are 3 to 4 feet to top of pipe and 5 to 6 foot to bottom of pipe, and when they had that trench open, it was excavated from back of sidewalk to curb, and even then it was starting to undermine in the curb, so they had to be careful not to put any vehicles against the curb. So I don't know off the top of my head. That's a good question. It was the 5 or 6. So Their opinion is, speaking for the water department, their opinion would be that, yeah, they would be not happy with losing that space. Obviously, they'll deal with whatever you guys do with policy, but just to represent them.
5 feet, it was borderline, it was
5, 6 feet. The other comment that was brought to me was the incidences of trees and the roots that you see everywhere where the roots start buckling the sidewalk, that'll go up as you get narrower.
I think a lot of it's tree choice too.
Right, and 6 foot, you know, there's a lot more tree options or a lot more trees that'll fit in an 8 or 9 foot park strip than 6.
Because if they water surface, the roots go. If they water deep, the roots.
So we may have to, if you go to a 6 foot park strip, we may have to revisit our recommended tree list. There may be trees that have to come off that list because it will no longer work in that park.
Some trees that should come off the list regardless, but yeah.
That was it. Okay, Councilwoman Barch.
As far as this, I actually did talk about percentages and actual numbers and stuff with Gordon for about an hour, so, but you know that's me, so, yeah. Always curious I am, so appreciate all the time you took.
And when I had questions while I was reviewing it, I called Shelley because I knew she'd have the answer.
As far as specifically the sidewalk, and we'll get to specifics about a certain development later during the work session, which is more appropriate, but I remember when the width of the park strips was changed, and it was specifically to address both the infrastructure that's underneath it and the damage that occurs to the sidewalks and everything else, if not, and as well, the fact that we do want trees in our park strips, and it is not healthy for trees to be in those more narrow park strips, on top of the fact that we do have substantial damage to sidewalks and roads when you have more narrow park strips. So for me, I think that the way that this is set up, I think is where we need to have it. Other developments can be discussed later, but as far as our actual standards, from what I've heard from staff on infrastructure level, on park level, I think this is where it needs to stay. Just from the 9 to the 8. Mm-hmm.
Kevin?
So the change that Gordon handed out, I just have a couple questions from Gordon. Were those presented to the Planning Commission?
No.
Okay, so those will have to be tabled for another.
Are you talking about the dead end main?
Approval. Right.
Okay, so if we could just move forward with everything else, and we'll take that one change back to them.
If I'm not mistaken, though, that's actually a normal standard, Kevin, the Planning Commission, it's because it's the water safety.
They can change the health standard.
We can change the health standard without having
So
a public hearing.
the issue is, so LUDMA, Land Use Development and Management Act, defines a development ordinance or a land use ordinance very broadly to include basically any standard that applies to development. So the engineering standards actually are, it could be argued that they're land use ordinances. And so if it's within the scope of the discussion of the Planning Commission, if it's related to some other change that he's making, maybe he's just also elaborating on something, then we can discuss that. If not, it has to go back to the Planning Commission.
That's all it is.
for their
It's in the same section that we've been discussing. It's in the same area that we've been discussing. It's with some of the other changes. So I don't see why we'd have to. So,
yeah, if it's within, if you feel comfortable, so I haven't even looked at it or how it compares to other sections. But if if it's within the scope of the changes the Planning Commission considered and recommended, then you can adopt those tonight.
I'm comfortable. It's a one line and it's a safety issue, so yes.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve engineering standards specifications revision ordinance 17-18 dated today, including the addition of number 23 dead end mains shall not exceed 600 feet in length.
We have a first from Councilwoman Barch. I have a second. Okay. I have a second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion on the motion?
Just some comments, if that's all right, for the motion. I mean, listen to the staff. I understand the 8-foot road. My concern is more not any
park strip.
Sorry, 8-foot road. You can ride your ATV down there. The park strip is I'm glad we're reducing that with the 56 foot, and I do have to focus on impact and hearing the testimony. What do you call it? From Dr. J over there.
That was a 6.
Jeremy Lappin. So at this point, I can support an 8-foot. I'd like to see a later effective date. If that would be accepted to give people the process to work through that. I'm not thinking of anything. But as well as anything that's in process, I would hope that we make some.
I can add a comment. If I can get clarification from Councilman Wilden. So by changing the effective date, then they can have the narrower road, and they'd have to have a 9-foot, and they have to have the 9-foot park strip, but they can have the narrow road. My concern is having the narrow road more than the park strip. Does that make sense?
I'd rather just see us move forward and deal with the onesies and twosies. Let's this out and have, you know, who knows
small roads.
Who knows how many more developments could come in the next month.
With small roads.
Whatever we've so I'd rather deal with specific developments on an individual basis rather than giving everybody and anybody a shot at
the smaller roads.
Especially when you look at the fire code, so the way the fire code is written, as I went through it with Gordon, we technically should be on these smaller roads. We should actually be red striping one side and only allowing parking on one side according to fire code.
Yeah, going retroactive.
So to not increase the size of the road at this point, I think is dangerous.
So I think where you had the hesitation, Councilman Barch, is the 8-foot, and you know where we were talking more of the compromise. Are you willing to adjust it at all, or are you only at 8?
Well, I think from what I've heard from staff, our standards need to be at 8. So we had, Jeremy corrected me that it was not a 5-foot, it's a 6-foot, and that was barely sufficient. And that's not necessarily a huge piece of infrastructure. So I think that staff is saying that 8 is where we need to be at. When we looked at the road width and wanted to widen that, we actually did take that down so it wasn't going to be all asphalt and take even more of the land. So we made compromises on that as we were discussing this earlier. I think that we should be following the staff's recommendation on this.
And then my question then to staff is, were you truly being conservative, or were you going easy? Like, what's just going to be easy? Because could you do it at 7? Would that be okay? Sometimes I know in my nature, sometimes you choose what's easy versus necessarily putting yourself in the other person's shoes too. Like the compromise, that's what I'm getting at. And so, because obviously you wanted 9, and that really put a huge burden on developers, and now it's 8. So that's just, I think, that's where I'm hung up.
I guess something I consider as I'm thinking about this 8-foot is something I considered with other developments and stuff is future-proofing the city as well. You know, we don't know what's going to happen. There may be at some point, you know, we need a wider right-of-way, and that park strip provides a buffer that we can go into to expand the road drivable surface for whatever reason. Maybe fire trucks start being built 14 feet wide. I don't know.
If anything, things are getting smaller.
Right, but we don't really know how things are going to, and so having that buffer is always nice. I'm always concerned when we hem ourselves in, kind of like we've seen with Pioneer Crossing, where they're hemmed in and they can't expand that road any further without taking land. And so this would only affect the park strip. So
Councilman McComber, I just wanted to offer that when we were meeting in DRC or with staff, I was one who offered to say, hey, take a foot out of the park strip. I didn't coordinate with any of my water staff, and I kind of had the same thought you had, which is, if they had an opinion, right, they would say, no, don't take away a foot, but I figured, 1 foot, they'll live with it. 6 foot is a third of what, so 6 foot is taking out a third of the space. So I kind of have the same mentality you had, which is, let's compromise, and that's why I immediately said, you know what, we could lose a foot, and I told the rest of DRC on behalf of Public Works, we'll live with it, we'll deal with it. I haven't discussed in depth with them losing a third of the space to go from 9 to 6.
Well, I'm not saying to go to 6 or 6.5.
Guess what their opinion would be, they would be against it.
So if I could, just an example from my neighborhood, 2 doors down from me, 2 summers ago, there was a leaky fire hydrant. and they needed to go in and repair it. And literally, even in a 9-foot park strip, they were back of sidewalk to back of curb, and it was a fairly large hole, very deep, in order to make all the changes and corrections. And so I agree with what Jeremy said. Could we go smaller? Sure, we certainly could. It just could be more impactful, and as a standard, when we do trench something like that, we're gonna have very little narrow shoulders and very little room to work in. And so it really, you know, on a 6-inch pipe, probably that's oodles of room. An 8-inch pipe, it's going to start, as your sizes get bigger, it's going to be much more restrictive. And so certainly, you know, 8-inch, not big deal. By the time you're up to 10, 12-inch pipes, you're going to start getting much tighter as you work in those smaller areas.
Well, I certainly appreciate the additional discussion. You know, it's helping me form my decision a little bit better. You know, for me, 8 foot, 7.5. 6 I get doesn't work. You know, to hear that, I wouldn't support a 6. Whatever we do, I mean, I personally be in favor of, and I agree. I was convinced that make it effective now, so we don't. So I appreciate those comments from the council. Me personally, if it's passed, and Kevin, you can answer this question: is there, for annexations or other applications or whatever it may be that are in process, if this is effective today, we have the ability to either grandfather them in or make it part of an agreement or something like that? Is it, if, does that make sense?
Yeah, so
You don't want to bait and switch.
I'm just going to be really careful with what I say, but yes, you can. The zoning authority that you have, you can do that, and your legislative discretion in the annexation agreement. It can create some legal challenges, and it's what's called spot zoning. So you got to be really careful there. So I'm not sure how we handle that issue. It's probably better, safer to say or set the effective date for the road cross-section change 6 months out to allow them to come in, get their preliminary plat application filed, or whatever the time may be. That's your safest way of doing this. There's more risk of doing the annexation agreement, for sure. But like I said, it may be a very small chance that you would ever see a lawsuit over an issue like that. And even if you do see a lawsuit, the standard of review for your decision or a spot zoning is whether or not it promotes the general welfare. That's a very lenient standard towards the city council.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we're also, I see liability issues though if we know that there's a problem with our current cross-section and we postpone it by 6 months and a fire truck can't get through, like we've had happen before. I see some serious liability with that as well, so that's just my personal.
Stop on that.
Okay. We have a motion on the table. Is it stands? We have a second. A roll call. Councilman McComber.
Nay.
Councilman Wilden.
Nay.
Councilman Porter.
Aye.
Councilwoman Barch.
Aye. Mayor.
Wow. You know, I honestly feel that this needs more discussion from the council. I see a lot of hesitation, so I would have to say nay at this time. Motion fails. I will entertain another motion.
I'll move that, Gordon's excitement, that we table public hearing item number 2, engineering standards and specificate, public hearing item number 2, later meeting to allow maybe perhaps a work session discussion or something.
Can I add a friendly amendment?
Okay.
Is there any reason we can't pass the rest of it except for that one section and just table that one section?
I'm comfortable with that. So,
want to start a new motion?
Yep. So, I move that we approve engineering standards and specification. Oh my goodness. The S word. No, not that. Ordinance 17-18, day-to-day, excluding the change to the road cross sections, which is
Can I add in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks.
I'll second.
At the next
Wait a second, the next
regularly
scheduled.
council meeting. Thank you.
Okay, I have a first from Councilman Wilden, a second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion? The attorney?
Plus Gordon's 600-foot drinking water line in it.
Yes, do I have an amended first?
Amended, changing,
Adding 23.
adding 23, dead end mains shall not exceed 600 feet.
Amended second.
I have an amended first and amended second. Any further discussion? Councilman McComber?
Aye.
Councilwoman Barch?
Aye.
Councilman Wilden?
Aye.
Councilman Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, there's been a request for a quick break. We only have 2 hours left and one more public hearing. I hope we make it before midnight.